we can only improve through feedback. You can't get better at something by hearing something you've already heard. You already have that information. So you need new information. Our main priority as a business is to create a place where we like to work. We're also creating an environment in which living the life you want outside of work becomes easier by giving you more flexibility with your time, with location, and those kind of things. Selling more product is a KPI of progress towards the goal, but it's not the goal in itself. If we have to prioritize two choices and we have to sacrifice our well-being, our happiness to get more financial gain, we're going to really think very hard about making that decision. If we are able to say, well, no, we can survive and actually we can thrive in this environment while going against what you've set up as the status quo, then we actually have a leg to stand on to challenge the status quo.
Welcome back with our second PVT. I'm Isabeau, and this is Thibaut, our head of strategy at IQM. Thibaut, if you don't mind summarizing what the overarching vision of IQM is.
Sure. Hi. So I think last time we talked about this idea that I discussed with Stuart to create this space in which we can experiment with alternative ways of organizing groups of humans. We're starting to talk about what does that mean in a more tangible, concrete sense, and how does that apply to IQM. I think it's worthwhile to clarify a few bits there before going on to the more broken down version of how does that look like in the short to medium term, and how can we measure success or progress towards those goals. The most important thing for me to clarify or to point out is that it's not change for change's sake. Experimenting with alternative forms of organizing groups of humans, it's not just to have a play around and see what happens for any type of change that we could imagine. It is with this idea in mind to create environments where people are more able to be themselves, to be more fulfilled, to pursue things that they would like to pursue, that they get satisfaction out of on a daily basis, and from a more long-term perspective as well. So when we're talking about IQM as a space in which we can experiment with different ways of organizing ourselves, it is always with that in mind to get closer through those experimentations and through those iterations to an environment where we enjoy being in sort of the broadest sense possible. And that's one of the first things that I mention in every interview that we have with potential new hires, is that our main priority as a business is to create a place where we like to work and we would like to keep working over explosive financial success. If it makes it sound very simple, as if we could just choose between becoming rich or being happy. But if we have to prioritize two choices and we have to sacrifice our well-being, our happiness to get more financial gain, we're going to really think very hard about making that decision. And if we go the way of the financial gain, it's most likely going to be because just beyond the horizon, that financial gain is going to allow us to get closer and further in the direction of that goal of achieving an environment in which we like to work and we would like to keep working. The idea of making IQM into this space where we can experiment with those things, obviously at the moment, because it's a limited company, is in the professional context. But I think all of the ideas of decision-making and hierarchy and distribution of resources and all those things, I am hoping that by demonstrating it in this environment, it can at least give us ideas of what is possible in a different environment as well, whether that be personal or at a larger scale.
Does that look like in IQM that we have an understanding of what is the most important to the business, and then everyone in the business refers to that when they're making decisions to make sure that the decisions they're making align with the overall goal? Or how do individuals in the business work towards that?
I like the definition that Holacracy uses when it comes to strategy, which is that they have a set of principles where one thing gets prioritized over another.
Mhm.
So instead of defining strategy as this plan or something like that, they say, well, if we need to choose between these two things, we're going to choose this one thing in general, right? So like I said, if we're going to have to choose money over happiness, we would prefer to choose happiness. There are a number of those principles which have at times been explicitly defined, which I think on a day-to-day basis mostly live implicitly in Stuart and my head in decisions that we make. We've made efforts in the past to do workshops and sessions with the whole team where the whole team was made aware of that. To get to the core of your question, on a day-to-day basis, the majority of the team will not be guided by those principles because they are too abstract for the application on a day-to-day basis. So the way that it ends up affecting our day-to-day is because those principles at a high level have defined decisions that we've made at a medium level on the roadmap or in terms of resource allocation, which will then have an impact on a shorter term scale for each individual team member, which will affect their day-to-day decisions. So it's probably 3 or 4 orders of magnitude away from 99% of the decisions that are made. And then it's 2 orders of magnitude away from the remaining 0.9%, and then et cetera, et cetera. And it's only very few decisions which get directly superimposed on those principles, and we can make a decision with those principles. But it's when you unpick why very practical prioritization decisions are made and you keep asking why 4 or 5 times, then you end up being where we are.
Does that mean that for larger objectives, that is not decisions anyone other than you and Stuart can make because you have that not concrete understanding that's onto why or how we make our decisions?
I would like that not to be the case.
Okay.
I think in practice at the moment it is, but that is one of the reasons, for instance, why we are having this discussion is because the more responsibility somebody takes in the organization, the higher level of abstraction they start making decisions on, and the more important their understanding of these higher principles becomes. It's kind of a chicken and an egg situation where we look at people's decision in the organization and we say, okay, well, their decisions are still not 100% aligned with those bigger principles that we want to follow. So they are not ready to take on those higher responsibilities. But we cannot expect people to make decisions aligned with those higher principles if those are not communicated to them clearly and repeated and put into a practical context so that they can start demonstrating to us that they do understand it. And those 2 categories that we've now added to the compensation matrix, where we're talking about understanding needs and expressing needs, if we don't expose people to the information that they need to be able to understand the need or the goal or the objective, then we cannot gather evidence that they are able to apply it and that they are actually able to understand it, etc. So I think both Stuart and I are, through this tool, which is the compensation matrix, able to transform some of those things into something more practical and tangible for the team to learn about and improve on and demonstrate their mastery of, so that we can then actually have them make some of those decisions.
Is the quarterly grow meetings, is that a time that you use to help team members align on those overarching goals, or is that part of our monthly strategy meeting?
The grow meetings are our personal development
Mhm.
conversations that we have with every member in the team once a quarter, where we talk about where that team member is going, because we want to create an environment where people can do what they want to do, what they enjoy doing. By the nature of the grow, we want to be listening to what people want to be doing. So we're not going to be so much sending what we think they should be doing, but we're going to be more listening. Some of the data that we collect about traffic lights and enjoyment in ClickUp, which are essentially measures of how much a person enjoys a specific task, which then allows us to analyze by the type of that task, what kind of work currently is giving them more enjoyment and satisfaction. And so that feeds into those discussions. Even if it doesn't always appear explicitly, it is data that I look at before going into those conversations. But it should definitely be something that is more obvious and transparent in our bi-monthly Where Are We Going meeting, the strategy meeting that we do. And I probably don't express it enough. And I think it's in part because I very much believe that you should only give people information that they can action. People tend to be very scared of sharing the financial situation of an organization with the employees because they think the employees are going to panic. Employees only panic if they cannot do anything to fix the situation, or if they are not asked to do something to contribute to the situation. Every example that I've had of small and large organizations sharing with their employees that the financial situation is less than ideal, but here are the things that you can do to make it better. It's not the sort of overall exodus that people keep talking about. And so from my perspective, if I keep hammering on about these lofty principles, which on a day-to-day basis, people never have to apply directly, they're going to start to filter out that information when I'm speaking. And so now 5 minutes of every Where Are We Going meeting is just people zoning out because they're bored of me saying the same thing every time. There's probably an in-between, and we can probably make a better effort at making it actionable for the team. But that would indeed be one of the places where we can tie back some of those short-term decisions to those longer-term goals.
When sharing the overarching goals or the larger picture with the team, is there a want for the team to be keeping you and Stuart accountable to the principles and philosophies, and them knowing that, be able to say, hey, this current choice we're making, I'm not sure how that aligns with the larger goal?
I think an accountability piece is always good. I think one of the things that's lacking in most organizations, and that's still on my wish list of stuff to tackle within IQM, is the accountability or evaluation from more frontline team members to decision makers or leadership. I very firmly believe, and this is one of the principles, that we can only improve through feedback. You can't get better at something by hearing something you've already heard. You already have that information. So you need new information. You need people to tell you things you didn't know before. And so that works on a systemic scale, on an organizational scale, which is one of the reasons why we have these very short feedback loops in lots of our processes. But that's also true on a personal level. And so that's why we have made many attempts at encouraging people to give each other feedback, gathering feedback about all the different team members. And in that process, Stuart and I are not excluded. But I am also very aware that the honesty or the candidness of the feedback that Stuart and I get compared to what everybody else on the team gets is probably significantly lower and filtered out because of the authority or the hierarchy in that case, where people don't feel comfortable challenging us. I don't believe that we are in any way perfect in what we do and the different areas that we work in and the decisions that we make, etc. So having more places where we have opportunities to improve, that would absolutely be awesome. One of the things that's now very established, and I think we do very well in IQM, is that operational feedback loop. And so the way that we improve our business processes and the way that we are able to handle that change, I would say we're very mature there. We are getting more mature in our governance processes of determining where authority lies and where decision making lies, etc. And I would say that's still like a bit in flux, but once we've got that in a similar place where it's integrated and it's working in a way that we want, then we can start looking at some of those harder elements. I want somebody to be able to stand up to me and say, I think that's super stupid. Maybe that's not the most constructive way of saying it, but essentially that. And one of the things that comes from role playing, I do role playing both on tabletop and live action role playing, or live role playing as they prefer to call it in the UK, which essentially means that I pretend to be somebody I'm not in a game setting, usually in some kind of fantasy, medieval type setting, close-ish to Lord of the Rings or that kind of stuff. I tend to gravitate a little bit more towards military roles, so on the battlefields, the line commander, field commander, that kind of stuff. One of the things that I always say to the people that are under my command on the battlefield is, if I tell you to do something once, you can disagree with me. If I tell you to do something a second time, then you just do it, because it's better to do the wrong thing together than to do the right thing all separate. And then we can have a discussion afterwards on how to improve and learn and avoid making that mistake. So I would like to get to a point in IQM where, because somebody stands up and says, I think that's a dumb idea, and then me or Stuart says, yeah, but we're going to do it anyway, that then doesn't immediately shut down anyone else from bringing anything up in the future.
We've, in the past year, hired quite a few people, including myself. I was wondering, how do you build this different philosophy in employees that did not think this way before when it came to an organization, or have real reason to fear wanting to do those things? How do you build up that skill or teach them to trust that this way is not going to be a negative thing for them?
I tend to believe that the only way to do that is to be honest and to be consistent. If people find out that you said something, but actually you meant something else, or you're going to do something else, you lose their trust super quick. And then it's impossible for them to take you at your word that you're going to do this lofty thing. Especially in the professional context, people are rarely going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And so they're going to more believe that you're going to act the same way that they've seen other people act in the same context. And so any evidence, you're basically fighting against that confirmation bias, right? That any evidence that they have towards that is going to weigh more heavily than any evidence that you give towards the contrary. And, we have to accept that as people, we are imperfect, we're going to make mistakes. And so we are going to give them evidence that they were right and we are the same as everybody else. It's just, we have to give them overwhelmingly more evidence of the opposite, and we have to consistently do it over a long period of time. I tend to believe that doing things more than talking about them, which is potentially doing it a disservice, because sometimes you do need to point out to people what you're trying to achieve for them to then pick up on it and it weighing in the balance. I still see so many opportunities for us. And when I say us in this case, I mean specifically Stuart and me, but it also includes people who've been with the business for longer. I see so many opportunities to improve and so many missed opportunities where I'm having a bad day and so I'm not behaving in exactly the way that I would like, that I feel like a bit of a hypocrite saying this is what we're trying to achieve, because I know all the times that I get it wrong and that we get it wrong. The evidence seems to point in the direction that it is having a positive impact, because people who have worked with us before and left the company and now have nothing to lose anymore by being honest, come back and say, oh, actually, this was a great environment to work in and compared to other places. Also, observations we get externally from people who have engaged with us or engaged with the process, who give us feedback that it seems to be working. Especially speaking to you who can see everything from the inside, I am a little bit wary of saying we're being honest and we're being consistent, etc., because I know that at times we are not being as consistent as we would like, and the transparency and honesty breaks down a little bit under pressure. I don't think honesty breaks down, but maybe the transparency breaks down a little bit under pressure. And so I feel I'm not really allowed to say that because I don't think we're doing good enough, but that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's the only way that works. You just have to keep at it.
Yeah, it sounds like creating a system and a vision that also makes space for it being a human system.
Yeah.
Where it's not always going to be perfect. What are the things that we're doing to try to be a more overwhelming experience towards the vision we are wanting?
I think one of the things is to create systems that counterbalance the power inequality. So if there is a system in place which gives agency, authority, and decision power to other people than the people who are traditionally in charge, then that gives a certain foundation and sense of stability to people who can then rely on that system and who can rely on the process, because you can just say, well, it's written here. Am I not supposed to be doing what's written here? One of the first things we do in onboarding is we make people raise an internal tension. An internal tension is one of the ways we have to change the way we work as an organization. And so within 2, maximum 3 weeks of joining, we will have the new person change something in the way we work as a business, so that from very, very early on, they see that they have agency to do that. And there is a process in place which does not rely on Stuart or me. One of the things in system design that is really interesting, that I find really interesting, is you should create a system where it is hard for people to not do what you want. If you create a system where it's hard for people to do what you want and it's easier to do what you don't want, they're going to do what you don't want. And so in this case, Stuart and I need to actively put in effort to stop people from changing something. Whereas in a traditional organization, if you want to change something, you need to go to leadership and ask for permission. And so it's easier for leadership to say no than it is to say yes. In the system that we've put in place, it's easier for leadership to say yes than it is to say no. That's one example of some of those things which we systemically put in place to try and prove actually we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're trying to put these things in place where it doesn't all rely on the people who have more final responsibility, final authority.
Yeah. One of the parts of internal tensions that I liked is that if a new hire raises an internal tension and it's something that does not make sense for us to do because of existing system or because it's already solved by something that they don't know about already, that helps me as someone who has been working on the onboarding process to understand we probably missed that. Then I'm like, okay, that's great to know that's missing from our onboarding procedure. Let's improve that. So for me, even people raising internal tensions that don't pass, and the way that we use the word pass to mean that we're going to implement it, when things don't, that gives me also a lot of information on different ways that we can improve.
Yeah, I think it boils down to this idea of the shorter the feedback loop and the more often it happens, the easier it is to implement this. Because if we did a yearly review or a bi-yearly review of our onboarding process, one, it would be a super daunting task. And two, we'd miss loads of stuff. Whereas in this case, if we take that opportunity to improve this specific process, every time something like that is raised in an internal tension, etc., then we're much more likely to maintain our systems in a healthy state. They're always going to be a bit scrappy because you're always behind, right? That's the nice thing about doing a yearly review, because at some point it's done and then you don't touch the PDF anymore. But everybody knows that the PDF doesn't reflect reality. And this is one of the things in discussions we've had before where you look at our internal documentation and you're saying, well, it's always out of date. And I mean, yes, it is. That's the nature of the beast. I think, that living with permanent discomfort of none of our systems are perfect, but trusting the fact that we have things in place to always move them in the right direction. People come in here with traumas, let's say, from their previous work environment and previous work experiences, right? And some of those traumas are very clearly to do with authority. Some other traumas have way more to do with process. Like I came into IKEM being like, well, most processes in other organizations are absolutely terrible. And we've got, for each of those, at least, I think that we've identified, we've got some stuff in place which helps people gain trust over time. And trust is always gained over time, that it is actually different and different is possible. Because I think if we go back to the beginning of our conversation now, when we're saying, well, what's actually the objective, right? Because we're saying we've got this vision and we've got these principles that we're trying to adhere to in this idea of creating a space where we can experiment with alternatives. The objective is a very basic objective, which is that the business keeps functioning, right? Because in a capitalist society, we measure success financially. And so if I can maintain an organization which goes against most of the established wisdom of how you should run an organization and is as successful, at least as successful as your average organization financially, then you've not got an argument against me saying, well, it doesn't work what you're doing, because I can show you that it does.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things to say, we can do this in a voluntary organization, in a non-profit or something government subsidized, where you don't have this direct feedback and pretty cruel direct feedback to say you are not as productive as the rest of the world, so you'll get culled, which is essentially what capitalism. If we are able to say, well, no, we can survive and actually we can thrive in this environment while going against what you've set up as the status quo, then we actually have a leg to stand on to challenge the status quo, right?
Yeah. This is me trying to sum up what I believe from this discussion. The philosophy of IQM is so that you can
Mm-hmm.
give me feedback if I'm understanding it or if this makes sense. Instead of us trying to focus purely on the financial gains that we can get or that we should get to keep it going, what we're trying to do is set up a system in place so that the individuals are in the organization actually care about moving in the right direction because they want to keep their place of employment. And also they feel like they have an ownership or ability to make changes that actually work towards us being financially stable instead of it being the head of the organization that moves towards that goal.
Yes. One of the things we talked about last conversation we had was the difference between restrictive rules of society and enabling or empowering rules of society. And in an environment where you're expecting people to take ownership and responsibility, they need to feel like that will make a difference. And so, yes, to your point of saying we want people to feel like they play a part in creating this environment that they would like to stay in and that they can play a part in shaping it into something that they would like to stay in. Yes. And that has many, many different facets and aspects. One of them, the most straightforward one, being that you enjoy the activity that you're performing, what you produce. If you're a developer, do you like coding in this environment? Then you've got the human side of it. Do you like working with the people? Do you like the interactions that you have with the people? And then simple aspect of it, can it support the lifestyle that you want to have purely financially or through other benefits? The traditional aspect of that is, well, we're giving you more money, and if you're unhappy, we'll just give you more money if the company can afford it. Your big American software companies, where I've worked before as well, the standard solution to everything is just give people more money if you want them to stay, or give them a more prestigious position in the organization, which essentially just means giving them more money. We're talking about, yes, we're trying to give you as much money as you need to live a comfortable life, but we're also creating an environment in which living the life you want outside of work becomes easier by giving you more flexibility with your time, with location, and those kind of things. And sometimes those are more important than earning a little bit more money. The last thing, which is one of the things which I think we are probably furthest from at the moment with IQM, but which is on the radar and which is important, is do you feel that you're contributing to something that makes, I want to say, a positive difference in the world, but I should probably say a difference that's aligned with your values to be more accurate, because what does positive mean? If everybody feels that they can influence, that they have agency and ownership of making those things happen, then yes, I think we will have succeeded. It's not a static target, right? It's not when you hit it, you're there, but that's what we want to achieve.
Would you say that them feeling that towards the company, that they feel like they have a positive impact on the company, or that their actions are helping the company achieve these goals, that is a positive feedback loop in itself?
Yeah, no, absolutely. When I started getting really unhappy about what I saw around me in the professional world, I started reading up and watching TED Talks and other keynotes, etc., on organizations that do stuff differently. One of the more famous people who has set up a different way of organizing big private organizations is Ricardo Semler. He inherited Semco and then changed it a lot. They're a manufacturing company. They make aerospace or automotive components. When they interviewed one of the cleaners at one of the factories asking, what do you do? Their answer was, well, I help build spaceships. That I'm paraphrasing. When every employee feels that they are contributing to the overall success of the company and they know what the overall success of the company looks like, then yes, that will motivate people to do good in their own field, in their own domain. And it's probably one of the things where Stuart and I are weakest at in our leadership profile is celebrating when good stuff happens, but that also expresses itself in giving positive feedback to people about their contributions. The most feedback I get from the team directly and indirectly about what they don't appreciate about me as a leader, that they don't feel enough recognition or valued enough by me specifically. I'm not sure whether we will ever be able to solve or not. Unfortunately, the evidence that I have is that there always is a bad guy or girl, but the stereotype where bad stuff happens and this is the reason for it. And so towards customers, we very explicitly agreed that I'm the bad guy. So if there is a reason why something cannot happen that our customers want, we blame it on me. Because that way, there's only one person with whom the relationship deteriorates and they still feel comfortable going to other people. Now, we haven't made the decision actively or consciously internally that I'm the person that people blame for when unpleasant stuff happens, whether that's because of my personality, my communication style or whatever, that's kind of where we end up. I'm afraid that somebody needs to carry that role in an organization because I've been exactly on the other side of the equation, right? In my first job, I was the person who carried the messages from the team to the boss saying, this is why everybody thinks you're a dick. Excuse my French. And so one of my first frustrations, which led me to where I am now and why I want to do things in the way that we do at IQM, is because I was that person and I was the messenger saying, why can't you just be more approachable and all that stuff? But that's not to say that there then shouldn't be other people in the business who compensate for that and who make sure that people do feel valued and that people do feel recognized. I think that's probably one of the things where, because both Stuart and I have a weakness in there, that needs to be compensated for in a different way. And that's not to say we can't work on our weaknesses, because it's always going to cost us energy if we are both not doing great for personal reasons, pressure, whatever, doesn't matter. That's going to drop. And because it's important to the business, there should be other mechanisms in place that avoid that dropping beyond the point where it's then damaging the team.
I would agree. And I also think that because of so many of the ways that we're doing things is going against the way people have worked before, there's so many uphill battles we're fighting in those ways of like, well, I don't share that type of stuff, or I don't do that type of stuff, or I just want to keep my head down and not think about those things. With organizations mainly being set up where HR is the buffer between you and bosses, I think that's an even larger uphill battle.
Yeah.
When you're getting direct feedback from your boss who is running the company and also trying to create a relationship with them that it feels like they could be transparent back to you. I think that is one of the harder ones, is the human side of us towards the school.
And I think with a lot of the domains that are yours or that are becoming yours, which normally fit in that little box that we like to put HR in, I've seen in you also reflexes to pick up other stuff that normally sit within HR. And then you might get more pushback from me because I don't want us to create an HR department in its traditional sense. And so I don't want to call it HR and I don't want to talk about HR because my experience of HR is that it just takes responsibility away from the people who are actually doing the harm, right? When leadership delegates responsibility of recruitment to HR and so then end up complaining about the teams that they get or when leadership delegates the responsibility of doing performance evaluation or conflict resolution or that kind of stuff to HR, it just means that they end up causing more of those issues because they don't feel responsible for them. So I guess my question to you is, what's your observation or feeling with regards to sitting with one cheek in that HR box, but me then trying to pull you out? And how does that fit with your view of how the organization works and where we want to go?
So that one's hard because sometimes I don't know which side of the strategy I'm trying to like fight for or defend. Because in some ways it's, oh, we're wanting really honest feedback. And so I'm like, oh, a way to get some honest feedback is for me to filter the feedback, because I'm not the boss. I'm not the one who's telling them things about their performance or their job. But again, in some ways, that's going against the other principle we have of creating an environment where people feel like they have the ability to come to you and share those things directly with you or directly with Stuart. So I think that sometimes it's hard for me to understand, is the priority the short term providing a more safe or more understood environment of how HR works within a company? Or is the importance of trying to have this larger goal that is probably going to be a lot more uncomfortable and take a lot longer to develop? It's easier to think back on what you learn in school, what you learn in your other job experiences, than to come here and to be accidentally overstepping or understepping. That stuff, they can create tension. But I think that we often deal with that well through how open and honest our communication is within a company. But yeah, I would say that it's been difficult to know how to navigate that from an HR standpoint, and to know when I might be actually getting in the way of the larger goal because I'm trying to help in a more straightforward way.
I think if we look at this specific example of gathering feedback and then feeding it back to either myself or Stuart or both, the way I look at that situation is you've managed to gain the trust of the team and they are comfortable coming to you with stuff, and you are comfortable enough bringing that stuff to me. So that means you are the person that carries some of those messages that people don't feel comfortable bringing to me. But that has essentially nothing to do with your other domains. That's just because of those two factors. And the coincidence makes it so that, well, you've got that and that and that, which means you've got a few of those puzzle pieces that would normally fit in an HR puzzle. But if you were a developer and you still had the ear of the team and you still had my ear, then you would still fulfill that role.
That's true.
And so I think that's maybe where some of the conflict arises, is because for me, each one of those examples is a separate conversation. Whereas if we were to say HR, it's one conversation. And then that gives you the answer to all those other conversations because it either fits or doesn't fit within that box. And so that might be where some of the confusion arises, because from my perspective, we haven't had some of those conversations, whereas they might be implied by the HR umbrella, which for me doesn't exist. In my experience, the only way that people are going to build up the trust to go directly to myself or to Stuart, anybody who has an authority position compared to someone else, is if they start seeing evidence that their feedback is heard. Now, there's a difference between heard and actioned, right? Because I can still take your feedback and then say, I understand what's going on, and I'm deciding not to go with what you've told me. That's always still going to be an option. So as long as people feel like there are no negative consequences from emitting critical feedback towards leadership, and that slowly builds up over time, then you acting as a buffer between the people who don't feel comfortable coming directly to leadership and leadership themselves, over time, you might make yourself obsolete because they have built the confidence that, oh, well, by now he must have figured out that it's me giving that feedback, still haven't been fired, so actually it must be okay to bring that kind of stuff up. And so in this case, I think the short term, it will probably not be a short-term thing, because trust is a very human and personal thing, and it's not a function, it's not a role. If you make yourself obsolete with people who've been in the company for a certain amount of time because they build up that trust that they can go directly to the source of their tension or the source of their frustration, then that's great. Then you've fulfilled your role in helping us get closer to that final objective. But it will very likely be that people who haven't been in the organization for that long still go through a buffer, whether that's someone else, because people also go to Stuart with problems that they have with me as much as they go to you, or they come to me about problems that they have with Stuart.
Yeah, from what I'm understanding, in part because of how my role deals directly with you more often than other people do.
Yep.
That gives you opportunity to bring these things up, and also using the soft skills that your employees have. And one of mine being that confrontation does not scare the crap out of me. So I'm probably always going to be someone who brings these things up more often than other people. It makes sense not to go against that natural inclination that I'm going to move in, even if it's not the kind of overarching HR role based on the principles and values and how I naturally am. I'm probably going to move in this way.
Yeah. I want people to like me. And so that is at odds with also wanting to be a leader and being good at leadership, because you cannot ignore the authority element in a relationship. If I have the power to fire you, we're never going to be exactly on the same level in terms of an interaction. And I can't pretend like that's not there. Before you joined, one of the more senior developers used to be that buffer. We had nothing to do with HR, but because he had been with the company long enough and had a cordial enough relationship with both me and Stuart that he could bring stuff up and know that wasn't going to decrease our opinion of him, people would come to him and then he would bring stuff to us. The fact that there is a person like that is not intrinsically a failing of the system, because, that's what power and authority does. Like I said, it just so happens that you have those characteristics and manage to get the trust of the team. And you also happen to take on some of those more traditionally HR roles, which then makes it extra confusing to everyone. It's only confusing because I make it confusing. Just to highlight, because we're saying, that's not a role, or that's not a responsibility or domain in the same way that HR would be. That's not to say that is not of value to the business. It absolutely is. We need people like you in that position, in that function in the business, to be able to get some of those noises, because otherwise that feedback will only come up when it's too late or very hard to deal with.
That does make sense. Was there any pieces from our conversation that you would like to summarize or highlight before we end?
I think one of the things to bring forward to our next conversation is probably going to be that element of how do we create that sense of agency and ownership within people in the team at an organization or at a vision level. How do we tie those two together, and how do we make the overall vision of the business clear without becoming an obnoxious thing that's just part of a PowerPoint presentation and gets told at every Christmas meeting or something? And maybe this is also a question to you that you can think about ahead of our next chat, what your take on this is, and maybe we can take that as a jumping off point. One of the things that we've struggled with pretty much since I joined IQM was that, because we're trying to maybe not reinvent the wheel, but at least step outside the norm for so many parts of the business, it costs us an enormous amount of time and energy to try and make both people inside and outside the business understand what we're trying to do, even on some very basic stuff. When people ask what IQM's business is, we're a bespoke software company, but we sell off-the-shelf SaaS solutions. And actually, we don't really care about what industry you're in. And actually, we also do consultancy services for digital transformation. But if you happen to want to do presentation skills or mediation, we can also do that. And it's like, well, we're making it more confusing because we want to do things differently. And if we're saying we want people to have ownership of an agency of that long-term goal, but actually our long-term goal is not a goal of selling more product. Like, selling more product is a KPI of progress towards the goal, but it's not the goal in itself. And so we're going to be fighting against people's normal conceptions of what a business is and what success looks like in a business. How does that look in practice in a way that the team can understand what we're actually doing, what we're trying to achieve. They can relate to it because they understand it. And basically, how do we not confuse the team more or people in the team more by making the goal more abstract rather than saying, don't worry about it. We're just going to make more money and then hopefully you'll be happy.
Okay.
Does that make sense as a question?
Are you wanting me to think more on how do we express who we are to the team so that the team can better understand and take ownership of their work and of the company, or more externally? How do customers understand who we are?
Let's start internally. And to your question of should we call it HR just because it's easier for now? How much do we use existing terminology and words to make it easier to understand but less accurate? And how much is accuracy important and so potential confusion?
Yeah, I'm happy to think more on that, and I like the problem. So hearing that this is a longer problem that you've had, makes me more excited to think about different solutions or different ideas. And we definitely can discuss that, as well as how do we create a sense of agency and ownership for the team from a larger vision and objective level. I think those both go hand in hand. So happy to discuss that next time.
Yep. Sounds good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.